The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I'm one of your co-hosts, Melissa Miller, and I'm a freelance science writer. I have some recent articles in Star Wars Insider magazine.
And I'm your other co-host, James Floyd. I'm also a freelance writer. You can see me in Star Wars Insider magazine, StarWars.com. This episode is super special. It is our Science of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace panel that we held recently at the Fleet Science Center in San Diego. They had a Fleet After Dark event, and we were invited to do a panel there. And we decided to talk about Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and its science, because it's the 25th anniversary this year. And so joining us, we have paleontologist and science educator Gabriel-Philip Santos. We have Claire Meaders, who is our cell biologist. We have Mike Tolley, who works on bio-inspired robots, and Ashley Juavinett, who is a neurobiologist. We got to do our panel inside the Space Theater in the Fleet Science Center. It was really cool to have a giant round screen behind us.
No, and it was a super fun conversation. It's almost enough to make me want to watch episode 1 again.
Visible confusion. James shakes head. Anyway, enjoy the panel.
Hello, everyone, for this very intimate giant lecture hall. Welcome to the Science of the Phantom Menace. We're going to be diving into some Star Wars here. This is the 25th anniversary of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and so that's why we are celebrating it today. By going deep into its bowels and ripping it apart with the science and technology being examined.
Like a tauntaun?
Just like a tauntaun. More like Darth Maul.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
My name is James Floyd. I am a freelance writer. I write for Star Wars Insider magazine and one of the two hosts of the Star Warsologies podcast. My co-host Melissa is way up there. Every episode we dissect Star Wars through a different lens. We have a guest expert on every time to talk about their science or their field of studies, from geology and psychology to dance and brewing and archaeology. So we're going to go down the line here first and have all of our panelists introduce themselves.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Ashley Juavinett. I am a neuroscientist and an educator and a writer. I'm currently working as an associate teaching professor in neurobiology at UC San Diego.
Hi there, I'm Mike Tolley. I'm an associate professor in mechanical engineering at UC San Diego, and my research is on robotics. In particular, I am interested in bio-inspired robotics. So we're designing systems that have ideally some of the properties and advantages of biological systems. And what that could look like is a soft robot that can safely interact with humans for surgical applications or wearable robotics. And then we have some things that swim in the ocean, like fish, crawl around like starfish and things like this. So a lot of fun projects. I'm happy to talk a little bit about how that connects to some of the robots in Star Wars.
Hi everyone, my name is Claire Meaders, and I am an associate teaching professor in cell and developmental biology at UC San Diego as well. And I teach introductory biology as well, and I do biology education research. But in my intro class, we have 2 whole lectures that are focused on mitochondria and chloroplasts. So really looking forward to diving deep into midi-chlorians.
I'm excited. Hi everybody, my name is Gabriel Santos. I am a paleontologist by training. I study marine mammals, but I am also a science educator. I'm the director of visitor engagement and education at the Alf Museum in Los Angeles. I am also a host of the YouTube series PBS Eons, and I'm also the co-founder of the Cosplay for Science initiative, and I'm really excited to talk about evolution on Naboo.
Very cool. We have couple of UCSD. I am a graduate of UCSD. That's as far as I got. But let's dive into midi-chlorians. That was kind of a contentious issue when it first came out in The Phantom Menace, that they tested Anakin and they were off the scale, rivaling Master Yoda. And it's their way to connect with the living force, and they live inside us. What do you think that means?
So yeah, that's a great question, James. And I think I prepared a couple of things to talk about with this, but I do want to first talk about how normal it is for other living beings to live inside of us. Actually, microbes outnumber us 10 to 1 on our bodies, and they are performing all kinds, for cells, all kinds of different roles, helping us with our digestion, our immune systems, living on our skin, forming these protective barriers. So very normal in humans. Now, midi-chlorians, a mix between mitochondria, chloroplasts, are designed to be ways that the Force can access people, is my understanding of how that works, which is blending some of these ideas here. There are some similarities and differences, though. Like mitochondria only inherited from egg parents, whereas it seems like midi-chlorians, that's definitely not the case, given what we've seen from family lineages in Star Wars. And we can change the amounts of mitochondria that we have. And so our bodies can make more. We are not limited. Whereas that's something that's very different for cells. It's like, this is how we build muscle. We can create more mitochondria, but midi-chlorians seems like you're kind of stuck with one number, and things like blood transfusions have not gone over well. Different experiments to try to pass around midi-chlorians between beings also haven't gone quite well.
If you watch The Bad Batch, they definitely try some techniques here to pass midi-chlorians.
Yeah, science, some scientists, sometimes irresponsible scientists, will try things that may not be ethically what we want to be doing out in the world.
We wouldn't condone it.
Yeah, we wouldn't condone. Would that pass our IRB review board? It's unclear. But yeah, one final key difference about midi-chlorians, they're measured in Phantom Menace in blood counts, and mitochondria actually are not found in red blood cells. So that is one small biology thing that I want us all to walk away with. Red blood cells, not a space where we would find mitochondria.
Yeah,
but
there's,
yeah.
I think just going back to Jurassic Park, they say, oh, Mr. DNA, you're in my blood. Well, not in the red blood cells.
Exactly, yeah, red blood cells, unique. But I was asking our other panelists earlier a spicy question. I didn't think it would be that spicy, but I was wondering how, if you were in the Phantom Menace and someone took a blood sample of you, what would you want the result to be for your midi-chlorian count, and why? We didn't get to the whys. Okay, so apparently my answer was the spicy one. I would want to be around the 5,000, 8,000 level, where Force sensitive, maybe have some like quicker reactivity, but I don't want all the power. I'm not looking to be a Jedi. I'm not looking to be corrupted.
I'm the opposite. I want the high midi-chlorian count. I want to be a Jedi, but my reasoning is one or two things. We live in this world, and I can't move things with my mind. Already awesome. But the other thing I like about some of the more Force-sensitive folks in the Star Wars world, and why I want the high midi-chlorian count, is because they have that connection to the living Force. And as somebody who would probably be a biologist or naturalist in Star Wars, even if I was a Jedi, being able to connect to my research specimens to the Force would be pretty sweet.
I didn't even think of that. That's amazing. I mean, as someone who has like worked with animal models for neuroscience research, like just getting the mouse, telling it through its mind, right, to do something would be way more convenient than spending 5 years training a mouse to do something. So that sounds awesome. I'm also on the high end for sure. I'm going to say more than 20K. Yeah, like why not? Is kind of my approach to this. And I'm dressed as Rey today, so you can imagine like Jedi is top of my job list for sure. I would love that.
Yeah, I think I would want the count to be very high, but I don't want someone to test me because there's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure being a baby Jedi, right? I realize that puts me at high risk, but maybe I'm partial to the old movies, but Luke pulled through, and I would hope that I could do.
It's good to live off the grid a bit before you get hunted down. Yeah, so kind of the other end, we have the Force and the living Force, and then what we see on the bad guys, they use battle droids. They use droids, which are mechanical beings, but they look kind of like people. So how do you think they develop battle droids?
This is also true in our world, that a lot of people are developing human-shaped robots, right? And it's not obvious that you have to do that. There are many situations in which you want to solve some problem, and it's way more efficient just to have an arm, or just to have a quadcopter flying around, something like that. But the reason that that many people focus on building robots that look like humans is we've built a world that works for humans. Okay, and I think this is also true in the Star Wars world, even if not explicitly humans. But we've built a world where seats are a certain size, and cars are a certain size, and doors are a certain size, and all the tools that we use are meant to be used with our hands. And so going back and retrofitting the entire world for a different type of robot is, not really efficient. So there's a lot of people focusing on building humanoid robots. We know what humanoids can do, so that gives us some vision towards what our robots should be able to do. And, I was looking back a little bit and thinking about the Phantom Menace and when it came out. The robots, these droids, pretty good. The animation at the time, it's gotten better since, but even still, they're pretty realistic. If you look at actual robot videos like Honda's Asimo around that time, it's falling down stairs, right? And it's sort of walking like this. This is how the robotics people were making humanoid robots at the time. If you look at the robots these days, the humanoids, they are amazing. The most recent Boston Dynamics electronic robot, I was looking at that video, it's flat on the ground, it stands up in some weird way that humans can't, but then it starts moving around and it's really agile. So that's just an example, I think, of where this is possible. This happened way before it's happening in the world, but we're starting to catch up over that time since the movies come out. And it makes our job hard as roboticists because everyone thinks it's so easy, but it's really not.
So you work with bio-inspired robots. Tell us about that. Could these be bio-inspired because maybe they look like the skeleton of the Neomodians that control them?
Absolutely, yeah. So my group focuses on borrowing ideas from nature, and there's a good reason for that, because nature has discovered over millennia and evolution how to adapt and be successful in the world. And it turns out one controversial idea to a lot of people working on robotics, a lot of people think it's just programming, right? AI, let's make it smarter and then we can learn how to control anything. That's not true. Your body matters a lot. One of our superpowers as humans is we can run long distances, we can run marathons, and we're very efficient at doing that. And one of the reasons that's true is as we're running, we store energy in bones, ligaments, muscles that we then release later as we're running. So clearly, this is what happened with the battle droids, because you see them running, and they could not run like that if you just took a motor and stuck it onto inappropriate body. It would, run out of energy in a few minutes, right? So they're looking to actual biological humanoids, learning from it, figuring out how to build the robots appropriately, and then, they can do these things in the world.
And speaking of the control of it, there's a droid control signal, and that works for good and bad. That obviously, when it gets shut off, it shuts the droids off, which is great for the heroes. But what do you think about the neural processing? And maybe Ashley, you want to talk about having a controlled thing versus autonomous?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I love that moment in the movie too when they all just fall. And there's a couple different ways you could imagine orchestrating that system. You could have the central control, which is the way it's organized, and there's a clear downside of that, which is if you knock out the central control, you lose consciousness, which is true for us, right? If you knock out our central control, you lose consciousness. But there are other examples of different kinds of nervous system organization that are out there that are more distributed, like octopus, for example. They have sort of multiple sort of ganglia that are all sort of serving as brains, and you knock one out, you don't lose control. The other 7 arms or whatever are fine. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. They could have been smarter. They could have had more like a Borg sort of organization, right, to their nervous system in a way. Yeah.
Wow, now I'm just imagining zombie octopi, and you have to hit them 8 times and 8 different brains to kill them.
Yeah, terrifying.
I'll just add to that, the octopus tentacles can actually continue moving once they're cut off the octopus, and people have done some crazy experiments to see, for example, will an octopus eat its own tentacle? And it can recognize, even though it's no longer attached, that it's part of its own body, and they won't eat it unless you do certain tricks.
Like put barbecue sauce.
Exactly.
Will they eat somebody else's disarmed tentacle?
I think so. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, like moms. That's really good. Sorry.
We went down a dark path.
One last addition for the dark path, zombie ants, if you haven't heard of those. Yeah, so these are ants that have been infected by a parasite. Actually, I believe it might be
cordyceps.
Cordyceps fungi, and so within, I think, a few hours, they end up, it goes through the whole process, and ultimately they die, the ants die. They get taken over by the fungus, and I almost thought about that as a talking point for midi-chlorian, thinking about what are the human hosts doing for them, but yeah, that was a whole other dark path that I couldn't figure out where I wanted that to go.
What if they're pulling the strings, the midi-chlorians, right?
It is the will of the Force. We're just meat puppets.
Can I ask, isn't this also sort of like genes, though? Like, if you look at Dawkins, the selfish gene, when he talks about we are just chariots or carriers for our genes. Those are the things that are mortal and we're temporary, right?
Yeah, so I guess a key difference there, that's a great question. So the midi-chlorians are these like other organisms that are living within us. So genes, our DNA that is going to be passed down from our egg parent, from our sperm parent. These other organisms that are being passed on, I think that's where it really gets a little bit more interesting to me. And I know that there's been some work thinking about other cells that are inherited in different ways. Ashley, you might know more about this than I do, but I know that during pregnancy, some cells, I believe fetal cells, can cross blood-brain barriers, right? There are other ways of inheritance that are not just related to our DNA, but also that can be cells that are not from us specifically that get passed on. But in this case, for the midi-chlorians, different organisms.
You can imagine like epigenetic modifications that happen also. So you have the same genome, and maybe the midi-chlorians have the same genome, but they get modified over the course of experience. You know, something like that could be happening.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, are the midi-chlorians that are in one person, like what is exactly being passed on, and are they evolving separately and then becoming their own lines between Anakin?
A Sith line and a non-Sith line is kind of what I'm thinking.
That's an interesting question. I think we need to do some sequencing.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, going to the Star Wars lore, we do know the living force there's like that central area that Yoda saw where everything kind of like comes out of, and so if we want to follow like just within Star Wars lore, I think they push beyond our understanding of life in there. But also, I think if we think about it from our perspective, and you can explain more, is like the mitochondria and chloroplast thing. That's actually its own really cool, unique evolutionary moment when these different types of, they weren't cells though at the time, but like they were cells, right? Okay, so like these unique cells kind of enveloped each other and became this weird, already symbiotic thing before they became symbiotic with us, right?
It's a case of something that was eaten and then failed to be digested and survived and thrived and then lasted and created all of eukaryotic organisms there.
Just like a sarlacc. We just started talking about evolution here. Do you want to touch on different alien species and you know some of the ones that we see in the Phantom Menace that are kind of unique? Like there's the two-headed announcer. How could you have Floyd and Bead as two heads?
Before I start talking speculatively, is like, remember, Star Wars is science fiction, so there are just some things that go beyond our understanding of life. That being said, we do have plenty of examples, even in the fossil record, of some organisms having two heads. It's a matter of like when they're developing as embryos and the cells don't completely split all the way and they kind of form these conjoined twins, as we commonly call them. There are plenty of examples of, even in humans, where two unique individuals conjoined sharing one body and they are still living normal lives, enjoying things, and so there is plenty of evidence to say like that there could be two-headed aliens. Now, in terms of development, if all of its species are like that, I can't tell you what the evolutionary advantage is as to why they kept that, because if it were me, I would be fighting constantly. So I don't know what the evolutionary advantage. It could have been that like it allows them to have multiple perspectives and allow them to survive better on their planet. And I don't know what the actual planet the announcers were from. I don't think they've said it. Well, they probably have in some old canon resource that I have not read or forgotten.
I don't know, maybe they just get really lonely or they just want someone to talk to.
It's possible. I mean, the one thing, too, that I remember is they both have completely different personalities, and they also have different physical features on both of the heads, right? So it just may be a lot of different things that happen as they go through ontogeny, and then it affects the way that they look as they get older. So there's a lot of questions there that we could ask. Could I answer all of them? I mean, how much time do we have?
How do we know it's not a cultural thing? Maybe they decided at some point to, graft one head onto another body.
And we do know that in the Star Wars galaxy, there are species that their whole culture is about mutation and grafting and things like that. So it's very possible. That's why I love Star Wars. You can come up with everything and be like, yeah, that makes sense.
So they kind of believe that two heads are better than one? I don't know, what about some of our other things, like the Toydarians? That how do they fly?
The Toydarians are really cool because we also have some examples of things like this. With the Toydarians in canon, what they do is, you see how they have the big pot belly? So in canon, they have, again, a symbiotic bacteria in their belly that produces, I think, hydrogen gas that allows them to become lighter, and so that allows them to flap their wings and float higher. So, in our world, there are some examples of, some creatures that do that. Birds, too, they are able to compensate for gravity by having lighter bones, so it's possible the Toydarians do that, too.
I would really like to know why the Toydarians, how are they resistant to the Force?
That one, I really would. I mean, like, in other species, they are resistant to the Force because they are completely blocked out, right? Like, they don't have midi-chlorians like the Yuuzhan Vong. Or, well, I'm going into real legends here.
Or if they evolved on a planet where having the Force was dangerous, like if you have the Force as your prey and the predators use the Force to hunt you, maybe the ones that didn't have much Force presence or couldn't be manipulated by the Force are the ones that evolved.
Yeah.
I have another theory, which is that they actually have like a Faraday cage-like skull. Oh. So they're actually impenetrable. And so I think we should probably take one apart and take a look.
They've just got like a built-in Magneto skull.
Oh, exactly. They're wearing basically a Magneto cap. Yeah.
I have another question about them. Hydrogen, famously explosive, right? That seems like a problematic little detail for these guys.
Star Wars.
I would just be careful of any flame source.
Yeah,
that's what I
exactly. Don't smoke around Watto.
I mean, it's not great considering Watto works at a junkyard where everything sparks probably. So
this makes sense why they're not using the Force, because lightsabers might not be a great combo around that hydrogen gas.
Well, speaking of the Force, how might Force powers work? That the Jedi can do all kinds of things that we see in the Phantom Menace. They have speed, they can jump extra high, they can have quick reflexes, they can manipulate objects or minds with the Force.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And the main answer is, as you said, Star Wars. But I have some speculation. But before I even do that, I think we should address the Gungan in the room.
Oh, okay.
Because this is a question that is actually posed by the film. Is Jar Jar Binks brainless? Right? Literally posed by the film. Yes. So I feel like as the resident neuroscientist here, we have to address this. And I'm going to take a stance on this here with you all. I think he has a brain. Okay? Because, if we go behind brains, we're looking at things like ganglia, like I mentioned before. We're looking at things like nerve nets, where it's just a bunch of cells talking to each other, and those kinds of organisms don't really have language. But Jar Jar Binks has some sort of language. It's strange, but it exists, so I give him a brain.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the rest of Gungan society, not using Jar Jar as an example, they have built underwater cities with hydrostatic bubbles.
Yeah.
And they have energy weapons that can be physical and you can throw them, but then they to destroy droids, which really they should have thought about borrowing in the Clone Wars. Like, hey, Gungans, can you make us like 1 billion of these energy balls? Because they'd work really well. So, I mean, you look at Gungan civilization and you realize just how intelligent they are. Jar Jar was exiled because he's clumsy, and he's not
different skill sets.
Different skill sets.
Maybe he has emotional intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. He might be a Dark Lord of the Sith for all we know.
I'm Team Darth Jar Jar.
Well, we'll get to see Darth Jar Jar in action in the upcoming LEGO Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy specials coming up on Disney Plus. So I'm excited for that.
But I didn't mean to avoid the question, because I think the question of Jedi Force skills is really good. And I mean, there's like a few different things we could actually sort of speculate about scientifically. Like, one is, I kind of wonder if the Force is a little bit tied with like magnetoreception, given like that some of Force powers are moving things that probably contain metals and sensing things that are moving that probably contain metals. I'm like, maybe it's a little bit like magnetoreception. And that's
there
kind
are
of
bacteria that can sense in this way, and so I think that does tie with the midi-chlorians.
Yes, beautiful. I love that. Yeah, so like a lot of creatures have this. They use it to migrate, etc. And so like maybe it's kind of like magnetoreception. I don't know.
My mind just got blown there. I'm sorry.
It shows up evolutionary-wise in the fossil record through multiple unrelated groups too, which is really cool. So we have the magnetosphere on our planet, and multiple species have adapted to utilize it because it's there. It really guides, not to be like, but it's a force that guides, right? So a lot of animal organisms have adapted and you can use it to their advantage. It's really cool to see it show up, from crocodiles, sharks, lots of things, birds.
So in theory, all the best actuators that we have, ways of making things move faster, jump higher, the engineering ones are all electromagnetic, right? For the most part, motors. You can, if you had some, if you could interact with magnetic fields, you could imagine using that as a way of being more agile. But you would need the surrounding field to be very strong, much stronger than it is on Earth. I don't know if we have in the canon any evidence about that. But
I love that. I feel extremely validated.
Earth physics don't apply.
That's true.
But like, there's the part of the Force too where people are able to connect to each other through the Force. Would you say that's because our brain also generates its own type of electricity, right? Do you think that's a separate receptor to detect those kinds of thoughts and stuff like that in people?
Yeah, so this is super interesting. You're totally onto it, right? So your brain is electric, your neurons are talking to each other in the form of electricity, and electricity generates magnetic fields. So your brain has a magnetic field, or lots of tiny magnetic fields around it. And people have done these kind of wild experiments where they will send the brain activity from one person into another person's brain and ask them to like collaborate on a task, for example. This is like 2019 study. You can watch the TED Talk. It's called BrainNet. It's insane. But at the end of the day, it looks like, people can communicate without talking, like through their brain activity, and do better on some simple task than if you had asked that person to do it alone, for example. So yeah, I mean, this could be the basis of telepathy and like lots of other fun Star Wars stuff.
I'm ready.
Don't partner with a Toydarian.
Yeah, they're probably the worst partner.
You just need some cash. They'll do whatever you need.
Wow, I'm still kind of blown away that using the magnetism as at the core towards the Force and the ability to connect with it. Go on. Well, how can you get like faster reflexes, faster speed, more incredible strength?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, when you think about like reflexes, there's multiple things that need to happen, right? You need to see the thing, that has to turn into a neural signal, and then that neural signal has to get to the right brain area to initiate a movement, and then you have to initiate a movement. And like in us non-Jedi, low midi-chlorian people, this happens in about 100 milliseconds. Like your typical reaction time to like an auditory stimulus is 1/10 of a second, 100 milliseconds. And like that's why when the sound goes off for runners, like in the Olympics, they get 100 milliseconds to respond. And if you respond faster than 100 milliseconds, that's a fault, because no one except Jedi could respond faster than 100 milliseconds, right? So that gets called a fault. So how Jedi do this could be at any stage of that process, right? Maybe their photoreceptors are faster, maybe their neurons are faster, maybe their muscles are faster. Any and all of these things could be different. and probably are, yeah.
And evolutionary-wise, again, if we look outside of humans, so many other species and organisms have better senses, are stronger than us, and it's not outside of the realm of possibility. It's all, again, what the adaptation was and the genetics that leads to it. Like our closest relatives, chimpanzees, you've seen them, they'll knock you out. They're strong, and they're our closest living relatives out there. And you see things like, oh my gosh, what are they called? They're like little insects, and they're able to spring with like this little thing on their abdomen, and their reaction time and strength compared to size is huge. They can like launch themselves, and it would be like us jumping over like a 2-3 story building or something like that. That world is not out of the possibility if we move outside of human space.
Are those just fleas?
No, it's not a flea, but yes, fleas do that too. Springtails, that's what they're called.
Going back to bodies and why bodies are important, there's some really nice research done up at Berkeley where they looked at the ability of cockroaches to respond very, very quickly. And the way they did this basically is they put a little cannon on the backs of these cockroaches and made them run, and then they shot the cannon, and then they looked at how quickly it would correct for, it's going to shoot sideways, but then it would go forward. And they found by looking at the rate at which their neurons could transmit that information to the brain, or whatever it's called for cockroaches, I'm not sure, and then back to their muscles, that they actually could not process information as quickly as they were responding. And so what they concluded was they were using preflexes, what they call preflexes in their body, meaning their body is built with the right spring constants, the right stiffness to reject certain kinds of reactions at a rate that's faster than the brain can respond, and then when the brain catches up, they can also use that. So it doesn't all have to be in the brain of the Jedi. The midi-chlorians could somehow be changing their body in a way that it can respond to, sudden jolts or something like that.
You don't even have to be an animal. Plants can do this too. So like the Venus flytrap, we watch it, if you put a fly in it, it closes, right? What happens is there's 3 little hairs on those modified leaves. If something touches the first hair, something has to trigger the second hair within, I think it's like 0.3 seconds or something. And if it triggers it, it snaps shut faster than an insect can react. So it's really cool. You can see these kinds of fast reactions and everything like that, even outside of what we consider having that. Plants we look at as these immobile things, but they react just as quickly as a human can.
Yeah, we see that humans aren't the fastest reflexes because they say that Anakin is the only human who can pod race. And he's got super force powers, whereas you have these other species like Dugs and Toons and Gran. So it really helps when you have the force to be able just to equalize against some other species that can react faster. But at what point does like with a cockroach, it's almost it's skipping the brain. So it's kind of like when you drive and you take an action and your brain only justifies it later. Like how that might work for the Jedi sensing the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking about it, like maybe Jedi just have a bigger set of reflexes. Like we have some reflexes, like if you touch something hot, you remove your hand. You never thought about removing your hand, right? It's a reflex. And maybe Jedi just have like a broader, like bigger dictionary of all the things that they could respond to in the world. I don't know. That's one possibility.
In my headcanons when I can't sleep, is like I've always thought about like midi-chlorians is when you have that higher midi-chlorian count, and we know that midi-chlorians connected to living force kind of affect the structure, essentially, of the galaxy. I've always wondered if midi-chlorians force evolution and adaptation in those with higher midi-chlorian counts to give them like these other senses and faster reaction time because they're forced to evolve, to adapt to this higher connection to all these things around them. They can create life. Why can't they just force adaptation in their hosts?
It's like being Spider-Man and given just the extra powers.
Yes.
But instead of radioactive spiders, it's itty-bitty things inside your cells. But not your red blood cells. One of the other things that the Jedi use are lightsabers, which we have a couple out here. How might they work?
I study animals.
This is outside my expertise. I was reminded that I brought a red one, so I'm evil.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of falling on me, although I don't know that I really have a good answer for you, except that we use lasers all the time to cut things, right? This is coherent light that basically it's just like regular light, but has this property of being able to, when we use laser cutters, we use one in my lab every day, it takes advantage of different interactions to machine material. You have different kinds of lasers at different wavelengths. For example, we have a CO2 laser, you can cut through plastics, and it essentially just melts it, right? We have UV lasers that can make much finer detail, etches of different materials like metals, and you'll actually ablate away atoms of the metal with just really high velocity light hitting it. So, there's different mechanical effects between, melting and ablating, etc., that you can take advantage of to cut things with light. Yeah, I don't know enough about the canon of lightsabers, but
I'm just imagining that, like, with light, you can basically sandpaper, having something fly by so fast that it's just it's basically sanding with light. That's pretty crazy. And you're like, James, that's nuts.
But the one big difference, the thing that I don't know, is that typically a laser doesn't stop, right? Until it runs into something. But a lightsaber clearly has a limited length, so I'm sure there's a good explanation that I don't have for you.
I posed this question in Return of the Jedi panel that I did several years ago, and it went back to magnetics again, that it's not just light, it's plasma. And one way they can contain plasma is with giant magnets. At some point, it actually becomes, the force field that it generates starts to become kind of solid. Like you can actually then bounce other magnetic fields off of it. Like when you have two magnetic fields, it can bounce off. And so that could be how lightsabers repel each other.
In canon, too, it's said that when lightsabers get close to each other, they kind of are sticky, too, and that's why when they, clash, they hold, right? So that's, one of the in-canon things. But if it's a magnetic field, maybe it's the right orientation of those fields, too, that's causing them to just, that was bad. But, yeah. The one thing I want to also bring up is, the kyber crystal, right? Mm-hmm. In our world, we have so many cool kinds of minerals that form these really cool crystals. I have a master's in geology. I'm digging deep in this.
Wow.
Well, the one thing that I want to say is, there's a lot of beliefs out there, and I'm not going to say anyone to not believe anything, but as far as we know science-wise, crystals do not contain energy. We can shoot light through very specifically cut crystals, and that whatever. It bounces the light around and changes its direction, or it can split white light into the multiple color spectrum. That can happen, but the crystal itself, there is no kind of energy to that source. So the kyber crystal is kind of special, especially because, one, you have to attune to it in the Force for you to get your color. And now we know that when you bleed a lightsaber crystal, that's how you get red. So the kyber crystal is very unique to the physics, I guess, of the world of Star Wars, for it to kind of act as that conduit.
What if a kyber crystal is just a whole bunch of midi-chlorians holding hands?
Well, okay, so a crystal, the way that they form is because it's the molecules of these minerals that form in a specific crystal lattice, right? A specific shape. So if you think of water, right? Water in its normal state is liquid, but when it freezes, those molecules of H2O form in the way that creates this kind of cube shape, right? So ice is a little bit, that's why it can float, because there's more spaces in there because of the way they orientate themselves. So perhaps the midi-chlorians somehow condense and form some kind of crystal lattice, which is maybe.
Or they can live within a crystal.
Or they're fossilized midi-chlorians. I found paleontology.
All my mind has been.
No, but that would be kind of cool, though, if it is. Kyber crystals are fossilized midi-chlorians, and they still maintain their connection to the Force overall.
You heard it here first, people. Moving on with the Force, the dark side. Dun, dun, dun. I don't know, do you think that there's in it some sort of part of the Force, part of the human brain, part of something that leads to powers that are unnatural? I mean, to the anger and aggression. How is that useful? That the Jedi see it as wrong, but more healthy people recognize that yes, emotions are good, and even ones that like anger and fear, they have their place.
You have to feel your feelings. This is a good thing to do, definitely. I mean, I think there's one quote in the movie that sort of speaks to this, which is, "Your focus determines your reality." my sort of theory, I guess, about like why people become Sith, and this is like what you see in the movies, and the lore is when you focus on the dark side, you become the dark side. It becomes your reality. And I think the opposite can be true, and there's like a lot of really beautiful neuroscience on this. Like if you revisit your favorite memories, you will feel happiness, and you're essentially training your brain to feel happiness and to receive that emotion and to revisit and live in that. And I think that's the beautiful side of it, and then the dark side is, well, the dark side of it. You could do the exact opposite.
When you look at the tenets of the Jedi Code, right, like some of the things that they say is like, Jedi do not form attachments. And then that kind of what leads to the dark side. And I think sometimes some Jedi just take that too far. I'm going into my whole like soapbox now, but it's like Jedi can form attachments. We see that with Obi-Wan and Anakin and Qui-Gon. They all have attachment to each other. The one thing, as they say, is the inability to let go of your attachments. So if you're unwilling to lose that, you'll do anything it takes to keep that thing in your life, which, fine, that's human. The main thing to remember for them is it's being able to control your emotion. You can get angry, but it's how you use that strength that comes from your anger that determines whether or not you are following the Jedi Code or you're going down the dark side and you're letting your anger control you at that point, which we see with Maul, right? That's why we can debate this a lot, but that's why he lost. He got cocky. He's letting his anger, and then Obi-Wan, even though he was so upset at the loss of his master, he took a second, he let his anger and sadness, he didn't let him control it, he used it to his advantage. He focused, he locked in. When Darth Maul tried to be all cool and do oh my god, he was like, nope, right in half. Because he was calm and collected, he was able to let go of his attachment to Qui-Gon, and he won. Boom.
Maul is kind of only half the man that Obi-Wan is.
Okay, I'm done. Bye. I'm just kidding.
And some of our favorite parts of Phantom Menace revolve around other droids. That we have R2-D2, we have C-3PO. Tell us about them and how they are more than just artificial things, but they are characters and people.
Yeah, so C-3PO, I think, is what we're starting to see, again, going back to the real world. It's amazing how much we're starting to catch up with some of this stuff. For the longest time, everyone working on AI and robotics thought the hard things to do would be things involved thinking, like translation, like reading text, transcribing, all these things. We all kind of assumed that the easy things would be, you build a robot and it goes and does your dishes. Turns out the opposite is exactly true. With the most recent generative AI models, foundation models, LLMs, what we're realizing is that you can, if you put enough power and processing behind some of these clever, neural net representations, you can find general answers to things that you didn't expect, but it's still really hard to build a thing. And so I think that's what's going on with C-3PO. You have an LLM in there that's running, it's been trained, it's better than what we have today, even though it was, a long time ago and a long way away, but they've clearly figured out how to do this. I think we're pretty much already there for a lot of his capabilities in terms of being a translation droid, responding to questions in its sometimes weird, goofy way, but it kind of makes sense. Being able to access all the information that's out there, basically. And you give it a few more years, I think we have C-3PO level droid, at least on the brain side.
So I can have a sassy gay droid friend soon?
I guess maybe already, I don't know. I haven't looked into it.
I want that so bad.
But they still won't do the dishes.
That's fine, I'll get another droid to do that one.
But yeah, R2-D2 I think is the harder one, because he actually does things. He's got his tools, he goes in there, he's like hacking things, and making something work in the real world is hard. It always breaks, and you get one video, and then that's it.
Yeah, the droids also show some agency too. Like R2-D2 actually makes decisions, and he goes out and fixes the thing on the ship, right? No one asked it to do it. So I feel like that level is we're kind of far from that, right?
I think so. Yeah, I'm willing to be surprised. I've been definitely surprised with what we've seen in the last few years. I don't think anyone thought trying to predict the next word in a prompt would lead to being able to translate different languages. That's crazy, right? very impressive. But I think it's, some people I think maybe are more, pessimistic or optimistic. I don't know which one it is. Some people think that these things are going to start thinking for themselves soon. I don't think so. I think we're missing very key important things to get there. And I think that's what you need to get R2-D2 for sure.
Okay, I have a question for both of you that kind of mixes your two fields. A little bit outside of Phantom Menace, sorry James. But cybernetic enhancements or replacing limbs and things like that with robotics and interfacing with the brain. Is it as close as we see it in Star Wars now? Is that something that's super possible for us?
I'll say we're definitely starting to see some really exciting things with connecting directly to the brain. People are doing this different ways, right? There's kind of 3 levels. You can have prosthetics that you manually control in some way, but they're getting better and they are more functional. You have prosthetics that you connect to nerves that you already have on your body somewhere, so it's not directly going through the brain, but then you can say, let's say I have a residual shoulder, I try and move that shoulder and then the device responds. And then you have, Neuralink stuff, people going directly into the brain and trying to respond to that. I don't know, I think there's still a lot of problems, it's not fully solved, but it is pretty amazing what we've seen recently.
For me, I think this is something that has escalated pretty quickly, actually, surprisingly. And the way, the brain interfaces work is they learn the pattern of brain activity and they map that onto, a muscle movement, for example. And that actually turns out to be a solvable problem, at least for simple things. So there's some very cool work, and not even going into the brain, recording your muscle, what your muscles are doing and asking, what would your hand be doing if those are the muscle signals that are recorded? And that stuff is really, really coming along. And a super recent example, I just saw there was a paper last week where someone actually recorded from a language area of the brain and turned this into a speaking machine, essentially. So for someone who lost their ability to speak, this device reads out their brain activity, and then it's incredible. And they actually have it in his voice, so they have programmed it. And so it brought me to tears when I watched this video because he is talking to his daughter in his own voice, and it's incredible. So that's the Brain Gate project, if anyone's curious.
It's reading his mind and translating it into words that he's thinking. Yeah. Wow, that's really, really cool.
It's amazing. And they started with a small vocabulary, 100 words or something, and they trained the system on that, and then once it learned that, it could grow to more and more vocabulary. And so now he can essentially say what he wants to say in his own voice.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I love science.
Oh, it's so good.
Speaking of loving science, we do have to wrap up, but can you tell us, each of you, where you can be found on social media or any cool things that you have coming up?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter still, weirdly, or whatever it is, at analog_Ashley. These days I'm mostly thinking about how we teach computing to our students, and I'm writing a neural data science textbook that will hopefully be out in a year or 2, and so that's the current project.
So I do have a Twitter account that I don't use really, but my research group can be found online if you look at bioinspired.ucsd.edu. We have a ton of videos of some of the robots I mentioned, squid-like swimming robots and different things. And then in terms of fun things we're working on, actually this weekend we have an art collaboration opening at the Beale Center in Irvine with an artist, Chico McMurtry, and he's been building these large inflatable robots. One of the demonstrations that he does is he has people on either side of the border interact with each other through these giant inflatable robots. It's really cool. Wow. And we were helping him just a little bit in figuring out how to model and control these systems. So one of my graduate students is up there in Irvine right now setting up for the show. It's opening tomorrow. So maybe check that out.
That sounds like such a cool exhibit. I'm also on Twitter/X, and I guess, I had a paper come out this week on student experiences with chemistry and biology with a few colleagues from UCSD. And other than that, right now I'm kind of getting focused, gearing up for the start of the academic year. The quarter's starting in a month. So rather than going out in the world and doing things, I'm buckling down and getting ready for school.
Support your teachers, please, especially your professors. For me, Cosplay for Science, we just actually had a publication come out a few weeks ago that talks about science communication methods at Comic-Cons. So if you're really interested on how science communication can utilize pop culture in a really beneficial way, you can check that out. We're mostly on Instagram, Cosplay for Science. We'll be at LA Comic-Con with our Dungeons & Dragons pop-up museum, and we're also putting together a Dungeons & Dragons Bio Blitz in LA, which is going to be like a whole LARPing experience, which is going to be very fun. And for me, if you want to learn more about paleontology, you can follow my Instagram or check me out on PBS Eons on YouTube. Like and subscribe.
I am James Floyd, and I have an upcoming book coming out, Star Wars Crossword Puzzles, coming out in November, so it's a great holiday gift. So let's give a big hand to our panelists.
Thank you, James. Thanks, Floyd.
So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank all of the guests who came to the panel and everyone who came to the Fleet After Dark to see this in person. And thank you all for listening to this episode. I also want to thank all of our other Star Warsologies guests who came out to volunteer at the Fleet After Dark event. We hung around and helped people make shrinky dinks and just talk about science and Star Wars in general. Lisa, who's our astronomer, Reed, who's our fermentation expert, Shang-Chi, who is our blue food science guy, and Amit Patel, who was on a panel with us a long time ago now, talking about ophthalmology and eyeballs in Star Wars. So it was great to just kind of hang out, and we forgot to take a group picture, of course, alas.
Yeah, we're also very grateful to the Fleet Science Center. Are you looking for links for things we might have talked about? Check out our show notes page available at skywalkingthrough-neverland.com/star-warsologies. You can always listen to us on the Star Warsologies YouTube channel.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies, or if you know an expert we should interview, let us know. It's Star Warsologies on Twitter or Instagram, or it's Star Warsologies, that's StarWarsologies @gmail.com. And we also have a fan group on Facebook called Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group, where James and I post and have some conversations with all of you.
Also, please rate and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service, and always, always, always share with your friends. No topic is off limits, even whether Kitster is the real Phantom Menace.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including Talking Apes, the Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. And there's a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History, as well as 2 books called that. You can find all of this at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies when we talk with a mission specialist from NASA about space.